Yeah, while we're loading the slides, right? I think I'm the last guy before dinner.
You
So,
actually requested, you guys requested to
oh,
present
is it?
last. Yeah, no,
Okay,
no, it's
so
okay.
yeah,
Yes.
we're trying to make it light. We're trying to make it light, and we try to make it lively so that we have more energy for drinks and enjoy the band today. And as you all know, right, cybersecurity is a very very serious topic and a serious conversation amongst the world and amongst the industry in IT now, right? Okay, let me share. Let me start sharing the slides. Okay, cool. All right. So I'm just gonna show you some of the findings that we typically see in day-to-day basis when we look at when we work with our customers. We always find our customers using a lot of risky apps and risky devices, and we are also helping customers look at the risky users. And we're trying to pivot from looking at servers and computers to risks to assets and to what you call this to assets and to data, right? And so what we're looking at is a lot of things are changing. We're starting to move towards activity. We're starting to move towards users. We're starting to move towards how data is being used by and consumed by the consumer, right? And when you look at the tax, right, we're not looking at IPS attacks or malware that being downloaded. We're even looking at even possible APT attacks. So, for example, what if somebody's trying to download or exfiltrate data from your environment? It might not be a malware, it might not be an IPS attack, but somebody's doing activity that is malicious, right? And we even have, when we do our analysis, right, we're seeing things like a lot of this where things are being the attacks are being so complex that it's happening in a chain and it's happening across different servers and different assets like endpoints, email servers. So this begs to differ, right? How do we get there, right? And how do we get to that stage as a company or as a CISO? And this is a CXO event, right? As a CISO, how do you bring and how do you influence your teams, and how do you shape the future of cybersecurity in your company? And obviously, I run the cloud business, so I have very strong bias towards cloud computing, and that's my background, and that's what I've been working on. So let's start before. Let's look at this one step back, right? How do we secure data before? We secure data like a castle. Like, where there's a perimeter, like in your office, you have a wall, you have a firewall, you have your IDs, people let people in, they connect via Wi-Fi. Everything is around your own perimeter, right? This is how we look at things before. And what we're seeing, and this is not just before pandemic, and what we're seeing, the transformation of usage of data is data is now everywhere. You don't even know that your employees are storing files in their personal Dropbox and their personal Gmail accounts. Your company data is all out there already, and that makes a lot of people scared, right? And what do we do about this, right? Another thing that we're looking at is when you look at security, right? As a CISO, again, every now and then, there's something new that people are saying. Gartner will say something, and I mean, there's a new product. Gartner will say, "Hey, look at this. EDR is here. SASE is here. Managed detection is here, and extended EDR, XDR is here. Unified endpoint security is here." So a lot of times, right? We are looking at we get confused, right? Where do we invest? We're looking at investment, and one of the key topics of this presentation is what do you do? Where do you put your money, and what you should be doing, right? So now, again, another step back, right? You might not be a CISO here, but cybersecurity, right? Only means one thing. Only job of cybersecurity is one thing, right? Make sure that your organization is productive by providing the comfort and technology but by providing the comfort that technology works as intended. If if you upload data, right, and somebody gets data, that should be the data that will be used. If I input in the system, the output should be as is, right? If I use a computer, if I use a server, that should be doing what we intended to do. So this is something, this is something that is very resonates in most of us. And let me show you how it works. The way we look at things now, right? We're even changing the way we look at protection. Before, what do we protect, right? We first, trend micro is very big in one thing, protecting the endpoint, right? And then it became network, and it became email, and it became the server, it became your network. But now there's so many assets now. If you look at the top right, the cyber assets, you got so many assets now. And as a CISO, right, if I talk when I talk to CISOs, right, they will say, I'm worried about X amount of assets, and I'm worried about X amount of attack vectors. And there's so many things that can happen, right? I'll give you example. This is a sample attack from famous breach in the world, in the US. They started with a zero-day vulnerability of a server, and then it became a misconfiguration of a storage unit, right? And then it led to a weak password in Active Directory that led to a stolen certificate in your in the VPN, and it resulted into data loss. So this is how, like, some cybersecurity experts, map out what happened and how it happened. But what we're trying to say is, the goal, right? The goal is number one. You need to know your assets. How do you trust your posture, right, if you don't even know your assets and their criticality? So, like what I said, right, first thing you have to do is understand your assets first, right? And because I said, if you look, data is everywhere. There's a lot of things that can cause all of this, cause vulnerabilities. You have to understand what are your blind spots, right? First thing, understand your blind spots, right? Then the next one is, now you know the blind spots, right? Another tip that I can give you guys is, secure the endpoint. I secure the user, not the endpoint. It's important because people are saying, let's buy security for their laptop. It's not the case anymore. A user has multiple devices. A user logs into multiple at home. They log into their work laptop. They log into their home laptop. They log in on their phone. They access work. They consume from different types of devices now. So from a mindset perspective, you need to change, right? You need to look at how to use secure the user itself, right? And VPN. If you ask my opinion, VPN is one of the number one VPN vulnerabilities that has been breached, that has been tried to attack last year from a Trend Micro research perspective. And because everybody's working from home, everybody needs VPN, right? And a CISO that our customer, right, a customer CISO of ours, said that 60 to 70% of all data breaches are caused by insider threat, which is very, very, very true. Insider threat can be bad actors, or it can be just plain manhandling, or negligence on the part of the user, right? And now, again, what's happening now is you're seeing ransomware, right? They're being more targeted. So instead of doing a pray and spray in your company, they're starting to target specific people. I mean, you've known this and everybody knows this, right? But it's becoming much, much more complicated, because there's also cyber mercenaries now, where you can pay someone to attack your competition, right? For example, you hire a cyber mercenary. Let's go after the CEO of my competitor. That's how advanced, and that's how it works, based on what we see and what we know in the industry, right? And again, business email compromise. Who's the number one target? The CEO, managing director. This is based on our detection data, right? They will send an email saying, "Hey, I need to. Can you please send money to us?" And it's approved, right? Please send money to this bank account, right? So one thing, right? You need to ask your teams if they're storing any data in cloud storage or SaaS products. And people will say, "No, I don't think so." Right? We don't use cloud in our company. But again, like think about it. And if you use Gmail, if you use Office 365, you're using the cloud already. You're using Dropbox, it's using of cloud. SaaS products is cloud. People sign up for services on the internet to help with their productivity. It's cloud already. So that's why I'm saying, right, when you look at asset knowledge and asset visibility, it's very important that you know where your data is and you know what your users are using, right? So from a tech stack, right, what are the essentials? Endpoints, of course, base, right? Make sure that you protect your endpoint. Number two, email, right? It's the number, it's like the main entry point for any attack. And number three, SaaS. You need to do an inventory of what SaaS products you have, and so you can understand where are we storing our data, right? The next one is cloud, and if you look at cloud, what is why is cloud so critical? It's not just data set. It's not just cloud that we're talking about. We're talking about general data center. And for most of the organizations, your data is your crown jewel, right? Your data is your crown jewel. It's where your user customer data is. It's where your team data is. If you look at the recent breaches, right? We've seen a breach where the salary information of the company got leaked. The customer data got leaked. What are the usage pattern got leaked? I'll give you a good example. Twitch, right? The streaming company Twitch. They leaked the earnings of all their top streamers. So that's, for me, that's one of the crown jewels of any company, right? So I'm here to discuss, like, what are the certain key things that you have to look out for to secure your cloud, right? You cannot avoid it, right? If you look at it, we did a research. We commissioned a company to do a research for us. If you look at 26% of the companies, right, they look at 50% of their workloads to go to the cloud 24 months from now. That's very significant, because before, people are just looking at cloud as, for backup, disaster recovery. Now cloud is the priority. Now cloud is the next, the default. We build something, we go to cloud, we go to Azure, we go to AWS. That's the first thing we have to do, right? But cloud doesn't mean it's all good, right? The number one source of breaches in cloud is misconfiguration. What is misconfiguration? To give you a perspective in misconfiguration, when people go to the cloud, um, you democratize the data center. You don't have to ask permission anymore. You just give an cloud account to your developers. You give a cloud account to your IT teams, and they are on their own to build infrastructure as they want and as they please. And sometimes, right, you give them to the developers. You give them to people who are might not be experienced in cybersecurity. And this is where the conflict comes in. This is where some issues arise. Where, hey, do you know what you're doing? Do you know if you're doing the right thing? Are you compliant? Are you sure that you won't have any problems, right? So this is where all of these comes in. And 40% of unfortunately of the breaches, 40% of the breaches unfortunately are caused by misconfiguration. And another thing is, controls are getting harder to manage. Before, right, what you have to do is, you have VMs, you have storage, you do AV, IPS, EDR, and compliance. Now you got cloud storage, now you have containers, you have serverless, you have code, now you have a platform. You're gonna have more and more things to look out for. You have more and more things that you're gonna be worried about. How do we make sure, how do we turn from this kind of complexity to this kind of uh, goal based? Before, it's basically, I need to buy AV for this, I need to buy IPS for that, I need to buy EDR for this. It's going to change. It's going to be from control based, it's going to change to goal based. And what I say is, do we protect, right? Do we have protection for our on-prem? Do we have protection for our cloud? Do we have protection for AWS and Azure? Are we compliant? And are we doing analysis on the activity for cybersecurity? Again, the way you look at IT, the way we look at security is getting totally different now. Another thing is supply chain attacks. Now, I just said that, cloud is democratizing infrastructure. DevOps is democratizing procurement. Now, if you look at open source, right? If you look at code, ask your developers how many percent of the code they write is actually theirs. Maybe 20%. Most of the modern applications now are written from libraries that other people write, and those libraries have vulnerabilities, right? Or they're also compromised. And like for example, the SolarWinds incident where SolarWinds was actually the cause of the breach for most of the organizations, and it came from a DevOps environment. So this is something that you have to think about, and this is and you say, okay, developers, you need to put some security controls in your environment. You need to put some. You need to secure your software lifecycle. Here are your risks. The main problem of this one is there are there are more developers to security people. In most cases is 100 to 1. 100 developers to 100 to 1 security person. And what are the risks that we look at? Like what I said, application risk, open source, cloud infrastructure, and runtime workload. This is something that your developers, right? Your developers has to understand that they have to understand all these risks. So when you look at security awareness or cybersecurity compliance, right, it has to be hand in hand. Your developers, you need to push back security controls to developers, not just from security. Because when it comes to security, when security finds out something from developers, it's too late already. How do we make sure that How do you make sure that you're putting in security controls as early as you can? And another thing, right, when you go to cloud, another thing you have to consider APIs. Your company must have a mobile application. If your company has a mobile application, then you have an API. Have you ever asked your development teams? Have you ever asked your application teams? How do you know that our APIs are secure? I'll give you an example of breach. There's a company in the US called Parler. That is a social media that right wing people in the US used to basically coordinate the attacks on the Capitol January 6th this year. The a lot of the reason why they were able to investigate very fast is because that website didn't secure their APIs, and people were able to scrape the data from the APIs as quickly and without any permissions and issues. If people can do that very fast, what can they do on your APIs as well? If you look at a few years back, I was building capture the flags for our teams, right? It's all about UI. How do you break the JavaScript? How do you break the HTML? How do you break the SSL? Now it's not anymore. How do you break the APIs? People are gonna start scrutinizing your APIs, and it's not that hard. It's not that hard to understand the APIs, right? Right? Yeah, and 2023, right? 2023, 90% of web-enabled applications, right, will have API as the attack surface. So cloud security, how do you secure? What's my tip when you look at cloud security? First one is secure the hybrid infrastructure. This is your old school stuff. Put some AV, put some EDR, put some integrity monitoring in your hybrid infrastructure to your VMs, to your network, right? This is a baseline. This is something that you have before and you are very good at. Number two, prevent misconfigurations and drive excellence. Meaning you need to make sure that you have you reduce your risk profile and your risk on your apps by providing guardrails and controls so that people do as they intended and they don't go away, they don't go astray, and they don't break stuff. And the last one is, how do you secure cloud native applications? Like what I said, APIs is very important. How do you scan open source? How do you scan secrets? And the hardest part is, how do you integrate them in the DevOps pipeline? This is not DevSecOps. This is basically knowing where to put controls, right? I'm not a firm believer of this can be very controversial, but I'm not a firm believer of DevSecOps because I believe security should be everywhere. You don't have to coin a term or create a special thing just to say that we're securing your development environment. One thing that you can do is, what people do now is they're putting controls everywhere from a developer, from infra building to deployment into monitoring. This is where, you can create a lot of this automation so that, you reduce your attack surface. Again, like what I said, knowing assets and reducing your attack surface is the key right now. And another thing is, if you think there are noise in events, there are more noise in the tool set, right? There are more noise in the development environment. There are more noise in the build. Visibility is paramount. It's very important that you have visibility. You need to put certain controls and to your systems and environment. Another one is select an ecosystem, not a product, right? Most of the time people see, hey, we need to buy security for this tool, for this technology and that technology. Now the name of the game is ecosystem and services. Security is becoming an ecosystem and a services play. Which company can provide me a better service overall, not just a better product at this point, right? And how to develop your team. Typically when CISO asks me, architects, analysts, engineers, very important while you're developing your team. This is how we typically advise customers on how to build their entire team in the team security team. Sorry. Sample journey, right? Sample journey. Know your assets, know your users, know your data, design your stack, and then get operations going. So again, like what I said, know your assets. If you look at it, the most important part in any cybersecurity journey is knowing what you have and what to protect, rather than just buying stuff for the sake of it. Again, this is my last slide, right? Last 3 tips, right? Number 1, discover your assets. Again, we're very important to know, it's very important that you understand like what assets that I have, what SaaS products I do use, what emails do I have, what servers do I have. And then number 1, it will figure out your attack surface, right? And the last one is automate your response. So those are the 3 key things that I would be looking at when I'm building a cybersecurity team or a cybersecurity program. And it's December, right? This is the time for you to ask budget from your board. This is something that I hope that it helps you. And good luck, guys. This is thank you. And if you look at this is good luck plowing through the forest and building your program. Yep. And I think dinner